Thank you very much, and thank you to the Dialogue Society for hosting this occasion. You might hear squeaks coming in from behind me. That's Professor Shirley Steinberg trying to connect. She will be our third and final speaker today. If you look at the programme, if you have a programme, I'm going to invite Marlon to talk Marlon Moncrieffe from Brighton University to talk first for 15 minutes. Then Guido Benvenuto, Professor Guido Benvenuto from Sapienza University in Rome. In Italy, will be talking for 15 minutes about his research. I will then hand over to Shirley Steinberg. I have actually made a PowerPoint on advancing multicultural dialogues in education. This is an issue of timing. It's giving my colleagues an opportunity to talk about their research. But if you want to learn a little bit more about mine, this is the book that today's event is based on. It's an edited collection with Palgrave Macmillan, Advancing Multicultural Dialogues in Education. Have a look at it before you leave this afternoon, and I can provide you with more information about this and my research, which will come through the Q&A, which I'm hoping will start at about 20 to 2. It's not just about the three of us at the front and Shirley, it's about you as well. So you will have opportunities this afternoon to ask questions on advancing multicultural dialogues in education, and any issues or questions you ask will be gratefully received, and we will start the dialogue when the three of us have spoken. So again, apologies for I'm not playing the straight bat. I'm not taking the coward's way out. It's just a question of timing, and it's important that we hear everybody. So over to Marlon.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Dialogue Society, for allowing me to come and speak again. I came to the Dialogue Society about 5 or 6 years ago, and in fact, my first publication as an academic came through the Dialogue Society. So always thankful for that. I'm back again now to talk about my work. And the PowerPoint I put together today is this one. The trouble with Mustafa is that he thinks he's white. So what I'm going to be doing with this is I'm going to be reflecting upon some aspects of my career as a primary school teacher, a deputy head teacher in a prep school, and some of the white cultural attitudes that I faced in those particular school settings, and aiming to sort of position how we talk about multicultural education, but how does that sit in these sorts of places, these sorts of sites where they're very monocultural, and where multicultural education perhaps isn't the highest of their priorities for teaching and learning. So I'm going to be using some of my reflections. This is based upon a chapter that's going to be coming out in a book that I'm writing at the moment for next year. And this is the contents of my presentation. So some autobiographical recounts, discussion on spaces of whiteness and cultural reproduction that occurs there, and a look at the discourses of decolonising the curriculum. They've come to the fore quite recently. Well, they've been around for a long time under different guises, but I believe that this particular discourse is going to be big in the next decade, beginning of next decade, and I'll tell you why. I've got some summary questions from this presentation for us to think about in order to engage in dialogue. Okay, it's a bit about me. I qualified as a teacher 20 years ago. Worked in primary schools, in prep schools in London, Berkshire, Surrey and Sussex. I'm a former deputy head teacher. Been in higher education for 7 years now. I'm a senior lecturer at University of Brighton. I train students to become teachers. Also work on a doctorate, masters and undergraduate education. I'm part of the British Educational Research Association. I'm a co-convener on the Race, Ethnicity and Education Special Interest Group with some good members from Suffolk and from the University of Western Scotland. So I'm bringing together all of my sort of knowledge in education as a practitioner, as a researcher, to sort of give you a gist and some discussion points about whiteness and multicultural education, and how they could potentially blend, but how they almost sort of how there's tension between the two theories in that respect. So with spaces and whiteness and cultural reproduction, the trouble with Mustafa is that he thinks he's white. This was something that was said in a staff meeting where I was present by a white head teacher whilst I was a deputy head teacher, to an all staff, all group of white staff, about a particular child who'd come to the school, very much a white school. He was from a minority ethnic group, and he was being bullied. And apparently, when he was seen at the sink, he was washing his hands because he wanted to get rid of his skin colour. He wanted to be white. Now, the thing about this particular comment, it was said by the head teacher in a space of whiteness about that particular child, where I was present as a black man, and I didn't like that particular comment, and so it was for me it was a form of microaggression, where nobody in that particular room actually stood up and said, "Hang on, that's a bit out of order." And when I took this particular issue forwards further on and it was investigated, not one of the teachers suggested that I may have taken offence to this. I've worked in prep school. Well, I did work in prep schools for about sort of 10 years or so, three or four different prep schools, and this is just an example of the way in which these teachers believe that they could talk about minority ethnic group children. Here's another one. Well, it's not there yet, but I'm going to talk to you about it. There was an issue where I was at a parents' evening. I was the head of maths, and I was speaking to some parents about their child, and there was an issue to do with a maths question that the child couldn't sort of understand, and I was talking to the mother about it, and we were both trying to remember which question that was, and the dad was sitting there as well, and we couldn't remember which question it was, and I started to talk with the mother about something else, and then the dad said, "Oh yeah, the one with the nigs and the nogs," okay? It was a Freudian slip, because what he was referring to was this particular maths question to do with zigs and zogs, okay? Where you're visiting planet Zog and the currency is zig, and the exchange rate, £8 for 5 zigs. How many zigs can you buy for £320? So I mean, for me, it just washed over. I just carried on with what I was talking to with the mother. But you should see her face dropped as I was talking, and the father's sort of face changed as well at the realisation as to what he said. And again, for me, as a black British man in pretty much an all-white prep school, that was my hyper-visibility, speaking to the dominant white British majoritarian parental group. Yes, there were some good parents there who saw beyond that, but for me, these are two examples of embedded racism in these particular spaces, in these particular educational spaces. How does multicultural education fit within these spaces? Because multicultural education for me isn't just for state schools or universities or other specific places in London or in Birmingham or Manchester. If multicultural education is to have some impact, it needs to impact these sorts of spaces as well. All right. So these are just some kind of examples of the embedded racism that occurs in these particular schools. As I said, these are just specific examples. I did have a good time in these schools in general, and there were some good parents. But these are the sorts of aggressions, sorts of violence that me as a teacher I had to negotiate. And these are what prep schools look like. Okay, spaces of monocultural whiteness and elitists, that maintain a specific form of cultural identity and reproduction. Yes, there were BAME students who came to these schools, but they came to these schools to assimilate to this particular cultural identity. Okay, hockey, cricket, rugby. These are traditional sports of Britain. The evacuation of children at World War II. They weren't teaching about the Windrush generation, for example, or other aspects of multicultural education. It wasn't part of their mindset. Okay, so again, how does multicultural education fit into these spaces? I mean, we've got to remember, these spaces produce most of Britain's politicians, Boris Johnson and so on, okay? All right. So Bronsky and Hassan provide a nice quote to do with white cultural attitudes. If whites mainly interact with each other, then this can result in a sharing of similar cultural and racial experiences. This can influence the formulation of shared attitudes, allowing for white supremacy ideologies to prevail, because in a setting where shared values and attitudes about non-whites dominate, white privilege becomes invisible, becomes the air that we breathe, the water that we drink. You're not thinking about multicultural education, you're thinking about what are the ontological or orientations of that particular dominant group, and the epistemes that you're used to in that particular respect, not other epistemes that can challenge. Richard keeps looking at his watch, but just calm down, Richard, okay? Discourses on decolonising the curriculum have been around for a long time, since the 70s. Multicultural education, in the 80s in London. These are discourses of decolonising the curriculum. It's just a new term for it, okay? But as I said at the beginning, it's becoming a popular term. I was at the National Education Union conference on Saturday. It was the first conference on decolonising the curriculum, because they see that it's an issue for teachers and for students of colour that their curriculum is white, and they feel that they are being excluded by it. So they came together to talk about this, and it was well attended. And it's going to happen next year, definitely, because of that particular attendance. At the University of Brighton, very much a white space. Most universities are trying to sort of achieve the race equality charter mark. I'm part of the steering group for that at Brighton. A couple of publications that we've produced on decolonising the curriculum. I've got a couple here to hand out if you wish to. But again, it's very much an interdisciplinary approach that we're taking, not just in education, in health sciences, in the BMS Medical School, in humanities. We're looking at approaches in which we can aim to challenge the dominant discourses in education, okay, through new epistemological approaches. All right. I'm going to talk briefly about my chapter in Richard's book, okay, because being a former primary school teacher, having to teach history, I was interested in the teaching of mass migration to Britain over the ages. The issue with the national curriculum is that I'm going to go through it really quickly. It inflicts epistemic violence in that, and if you're going to be a decolonist of the curriculum, you have to detect epistemic violence and arrest it, okay? So I've arrested this form of epistemic violence in the national curriculum. National curriculum stops at 1066 for Key Stage 2. It only talks about the Vikings and the Saxons, European stories and whiteness. So what this means for children at Key Stage 2 in the primary school is that they don't get to learn about the stories of their parents and their grandparents in terms of them coming to Britain, because it's not a statutory requirement. Okay, so there's whiteness in the national curriculum, and my chapter in Richard's book talks about that. It identifies that, and then then it basically juxtaposes that violence that children are being asked to learn of in the national curriculum, yeah, and the dialogue that occurs after that in terms of shaping national identity. What happened in the 70s and the 80s, even in the 60s in Britain, is exactly the same thing. There was violence. There were cross-cultural encounters, and there was dialogue after that as well, to aim to sort of shape a new sense of national identity. So, I mean, I basically talked with my mother and her experiences of Brexit in 1981. I was there as well as a child. My grandparents were there as well. I've basically taken those particular stories and the stories of the national curriculum. I've given them to sort of trainee teachers, white British trainee teachers, and this is what they say about this. You've got the opportunity to contrast dominant discourses with marginalised discourses, okay? You can kind of make relations in that particular way. It's Britishness. We talk about fundamental British values. If we're going to learn about notions of mutual respect, tolerance, democracy, we don't have to go back to the Vikings and the Saxons. We can learn about more recent forms of mass migration to learn about tolerance and mutual respect and so on, okay? So I'm kind of advocating for this notion of critical transformative multicultural education, where you can juxtapose dominant discourses with more marginalised discourses to create new epistemes, new advanced epistemes that are much more inclusive for teaching and learning, okay? All right? But again, going back to the white spaces that I was talking of, okay, yeah, we might be able to bring in the Anglo-Saxons and, the Black British people from the Windrush generation and teach about that in prep schools, but to what extent are prep schools are going to be talking about these guys, okay? Especially when it comes to Black British history, they're happy to talk about Nelson Mandela and Rosa Parks from America, but when it comes to Black British history, that's not part of the curriculum, okay? So Paul Stevenson, Maurice Burton, Stephen Lawrence, Bernie Grant, Okay, they're not statutory requirements of the national curriculum. So the national curriculum has avoided teaching and learning about specific aspects of Black British history. It prefers to sweep it under the carpet and look at examples from across the world, which needs to be challenged. Okay, that's a form of epistemic violence as well, if you want. Okay, so these spaces of monocultural whiteness, it's a form of cultural maintenance and reproduction need to be challenged. If and multicultural education, has to go into these particular fields, yeah, and stand up to what has been reproduced by the elites in society. Okay, so here are some questions for thinking. To what extent does critical multicultural education really have the ability to penetrate, influence, and transform practice in traditional monocultural white cultural spaces such as the prep school? I mean, it's challenging the universities at the moment through that. And what is the way forward following decolonisation as well? Okay, is it a separation? Do we create a new separate canon, or do we synthesise knowledge? Okay, because after we do uproot, we have to move forwards. Okay, so I'm going to stop there.
Thank you for inviting me. And I really know really bit about this dialogue society. Oh, thanks. But I'm really proud to be here. And thanks, Richard, for the inviting. It was a visiting professor in Rome last year, so we just meet them. And we started to decide to have not also that meeting, but to discuss how in the different countries. I mean, I'm Italian. You are British. You are England. You are coming from other countries. We use different words from the same issue, or reverse. The same word for different problems. So you are talking about multicultural. We are talking about intercultural. But we have 3 points to. Okay, let's go faster. I suppose it was 15, not 15. So I'm sorry. I'll give it my. That's my English. 50, 15 is so easy, So we have 3 points in 15. Don't worry. First, a historical background. Not only me. Italian people knows. Everybody knows that. We were immigrants. So if you calculate, if you just understand that 60 million in the world, 4 million now in Italy. So there's a large debate in Italy. What we mean for multicultural, intercultural? How to organize the different countries, different people comes from different countries in this period, in a change of government every 5 months. It's quite new, like in this period in England. But anyway. We just changed government in 1 year, every year. So the law are so unstable, So we don't. There's a big problem. So that's the history, So I just want to remember that one because this is the important point to underline to understand how school and how institution can afford, can confront and make something the difference. So that's the speech. There's a lot of books in the last 10 years. Talking about how that migrant, the narration and dialogues, by institution, that's a kind of difficulties in school. Like it's not monocultural. We have too many cultures,
Monoethnic.
Yeah. That's a problem, and then there's a personal present for you.
Okay. Yeah. No, I agree with.
Okay. That's. I want to just to stress the problem. That's students in the year. They are growing from nothing to 800,000 in the school. So I think that the very best point or to attack to combat some issue or multicultural intercultural problems are in the school because schools are a big mediator in a way. We can imagine that change. So this is the second point. I can go very faster for that one because I think it's a large debate. But in Italy, we are talking about intercultural education. Wow. Why? Because in a way, this is in the law. Why the multicultural approach encourage ethnic minorities to safeguard the original culture. And we have a different culture in Italy, not only coming from abroad, Don't forget that Italy, nation, Italian states, just starting 150 years ago. We are not so old in a way. We're a land of occupation from century. I have to forget the empire, After the empire was, the Middle Age, French people, Denmark, the north of it, except British. Sorry, Spanish. Oh, you got the rest of the world, you know. But anyway, that's very joke. But anyway, so intercultural priority should be given, and the problem is how to start that words. How we mean for dialogue. It's only to talk. The cultural dialogue does not recommend simply talking, but anyway, I think we need to understand that we need the ethical requirement for dialogue. We have to change the paradigm in a way. So do we want to live in a country where everybody has civil rights, and respect but separate, or do we want a country, a land, a territory? We are discussing how you are in a union or are you out of a union. So what the boundary, you know? How will you conceive that one? So that's the difference, and so that's why we prefer to talk about intercultural, just to have a mediator, to be between countries, between dialogue means, you know, not only to encourage respect, but solidarity and to go over. So I think that's a kind of dreams in a way. But if you don't live with dreams, you know, it's difficult to go some problems and solve that problem. So that's a present. Do you remember that famous song? 1963, Sam Cooke. Yeah, it was a change is gonna come, and we are waiting. We are waiting that change. What's the change? I think the school, and I want to go really back. Maybe you know that one. 1899. In that chapter, I study a lot with you, and I know, I'm sorry, that's American. But anyway, I think the way to conceive our institution had to be linked, had to be in a dialogue. You know, the arrow is dialogue. And it was 120 years ago. So we are still debating how that dialogue is working or is not working. And what's the problem? If there are no arrow on the bidirectional, we just waste everything. We just separate, you know, experience from life. So why we are still discussing how that's institution, that's family, that's, you know, territory, that's what's the environment, so on, and we are here. If you don't have a good training for teacher, that's a big problem, especially in Italy. Linguistic intercultural education, it's a problem not only because there's other language, 190 language. We have problem with dialect. I mean, in Italy. Maybe you know, I think you have been in Italy. If you go in Sicily, they talk in different language. What's happened when Africans arrived in Sicily? They are not Italy. And the Italian teacher had to manage that problem. So give me the 5 minutes. Oh, that's 5 right now. Okay, so go to the third point. Okay, we can come back. Oh, that's minority. We have dialect and linguistic culture minorities. They are very small, you know, but they are in Italy. We have to safeguard all dimensions. So what we mean for dialogue? Linguistic literacy when you come from other countries. And respect for difference. There are differences in north of Italy, south of Italy, in central of Italy. That's how the invasion problem, you know, in the era and the history. So third point, for a second, it's just a big presentation. I'm working at Roma, one of the 3 universities in Roma. It's Sapienza, I think by him. And there are 3 universities, but they are still enrolled in a big project. And why I would like to show and to use my three last minutes. Because the role of university, I mean, technical reports, research, publication, so on, is the way just to make better our research and that dialogue in an academical level. So we want a lot of money, 6.5 1.5 million of euros in 150 or 80 departments in Italy, just to talk about how include migrants. So why the words are so important? You talk about assimilation, right? You understand? Right? Yeah, maybe. Okay.
We'll talk about
okay. Okay, we can. What we mean for assimilation? What we mean for inclusive education? Then intercultural, multicultural, or racism as a problem that we are going to fight. So that's where's the aim of that one? That's three aims. First, the center just create a research center of migration, diversity, and inclusive strategies. How to match the problem training teacher. Second, that's a doctor. That's why we are going to invite special visiting professor. Last year was Richard Race. This year was McKinney. Maybe Shirley. Shirley, are you listening? No, he's not. Oh. Okay, we are waiting for the fund, just to invite professor and to try the possibilities to debate about this. And we have two other possibilities for students to work on their titles. And so, project, just going to finish. This is a long list of title of our interest, and there's in bracket the name of the professor that are interested in that research. So integration process of immigrants, they are psychologists. How to study dimensional migration and so on in works, in services. And Piero Lucisano is involved in research. Students in university it's not a problem of culture, it's a problem of market somewhere. Are they have the same possibilities to be enrolled in a different part of society and so on? That's integration, ethnic relation, intercultural dynamics. So this is a large list on how to study. This is a psychological point of view, because I'm working in the department of psychology and educational science. I'm working on social pedagogy. But all the title are trying. Sorry, I forgot to say that the project's still running for 5 years. We are in the second year. So that's why, not why I'm here. I'm here because you invite me. But we could try to have other level, of agreement and working together. So just to close, that's a title, and at the end, me and another professor, this is area of intercultural education. So what we mean for intercultural education, we can speak about how to train teacher, how to work on textbook. We have a lot of problem, how to why people, it's the same. And the crusade. Okay, we talk it later, maybe. Yeah. I don't have so much time. I'm working in that spirit in how to help. There are special service institution in Italy just to teach Italians as a second language. And there's a provincial area, regional and provincial area for teaching. But how to teach teacher to teach better Italian as a second language when they come from different countries. And that's the other problem, the certification. The policy and politics want to need to control, Okay, 1 minute. For the certification, they need the second level, the A2, just to be in Italy. So how to reach that level? How to reach in a communicative and in the best way. So we are going to study with all that center in how linguistic education could manage, use new tools to arrive in a different certification, not only for policy, but to communicate, to be integrated, to be included in a society.
My relationship with the Dialogue Society is only a couple of years old, and I've worked here in Canada for the last 10 years with the Intercultural Dialogue Society, which are all linked. And the beauty, as was mentioned earlier, is the notion of combining democracy and dialogue, and indeed that it is truly the only way democracy can even be attempted is to have dialogue. So I'm going to quickly, in like 2 minutes, do a quick précis on my theory, and then I'm going to go straight to practice and the work that I do in dialogic research in community and school engagement. My work is based on critical theory, basically the notion of how power works, identifying how power works, and the notion of who benefits from power. And so that comes up a lot in my work. And so I believe the dialogue is one of the strong ways to thematically pull out the notions of power and understanding ourselves in relationship to how power works. And it's also based on the word that Levi-Strauss popularized, the French word bricolage, which I'm sure all of you have heard, and it is the notion of a toolbox, basically a toolbox. And instead of being wedded to one particular research methodology or paradigm, my work combines multiple ways of seeing, ways of making meaning in a bricolage for what I believe is a thicker and richer interpretation of the work that I want to do. And that given, I want to talk about the notion of community engagement and school engagement as one and the same. That I believe that education, the notion of education cannot function healthily without the surrounding community, and the opposite is that. So I try to do both work in both ways. It also is influenced very much by intercultural ways of seeing the world, the notion of the interculturality, and then I add to that intergenerational work. So my work is both intercultural and intergenerational. And I want to talk about just two things I've been doing very quickly in Canada at this point, just recently, and I've been doing it a lot in the United States and some of it in a bit of Europe. One would be the work I've been doing with women in theater. My background is originally in theater. And with our Intercultural Dialogue Institute, which is the equivalent to the Dialogue Society in Calgary and to London, what we found is that as much as the group works, they still remain basically Turkish Muslim women in hijab and separate from society in Canada in many ways. They're respected, they're liked, but there's always this feeling of sitting at one table in the cafeteria while other people sit in other tables. And the question became, as researcher and as an educational friend to the society, how could we create a female way of speaking to women that is not just the Intercultural Dialogue Society speaking to each other, but that the community together could become one. And so what I organized was women in the Dialogue Society and women outside the Dialogue Society of multiple different identifiable ways, race, religion, culture, to ask them to tell their stories, because all of us, other than First Nations women or Indigenous women, are all strangers to Canada. And so I asked them all to either write or narrate on tape their story. And this included women who were immigrants from Turkey and recent refugees from Turkey and refugees from Syria, different places, women who'd been in Canada for 2 or 3 generations, and just all types of different women. And bonding them was the fact that we were all women. And because we found that it was hard for some women who were not used to writing to write alone, we decided that we would work together in kind of a little club atmosphere where we're writing or telling our stories to someone else or recording it. And we did this. And it was at first very frightening for a lot of women who were not in the schools. They were not educators. They may have not finished even high school, but they wanted to tell their story, so they were intimidated. So we tried to use visiting, talking, drinking tea, ways to reach to each other as women. And the beauty is it worked. The women liked each other, and they told their stories. And then for International Women's Week in March, each woman, we assisted them to kind of make a paragraph or 2 paragraphs of telling their story. And we created a reader's theater, which many of you may know is a form of theater in which everyone speaks. They're not actors, but they speak and they read it. They don't have to memorize it, which of course takes away the fear of performing and having to memorize. It was a tremendously successful event, and it was one of the first times in the city that women of different cultures were able to share their stories as women. And while many stories were different, they were so the same in many kind of spiritual and epistemological ways. A very successful, loving time, and something that we will continue to do is to recreate this theatrical experience through narrative and telling stories. The second story I want to talk to about is the work of intergenerational dialogue, in which I work I work not as employed, but this is my volunteer work, and my work is an academic. I don't really write about this in that the people I talk to you about today are not research subjects. They're people that assist me in the work, in me formulating the theories that I do, and we discuss it, but I don't use them as subjects. But I go down 3 hours south into a very desolate area below the mountains in southern Alberta, which is in Canada, which is above Montana. Just think of the tundra. Siberia might be a similar experience. And this is a place where these, what we call in Canada, First Nations people have been relocated many generations ago. They were taken from their territorial lands and placed on lands without good water, without good hunting. They were totally robbed of the land that they owned by the white settlers. And they live in this place, and they now have created their own school district, which was originally done by the Crown, and it was taken from the Crown, and the First Nations people insisted on having their own school division, and they created these exquisite, wonderful buildings that were done by very modern architects, but they were in the shape of teepees and arrows, and the schools are quite wonderful, and they teach they teach a double curriculum of what, as Marlon referred to, a white curriculum, a traditional colonial curriculum, a Crown curriculum, which is Canadian, and then they teach alongside it, parallel, an Indigenous curriculum. I'm not saying that this is the best way to do it, but it is certainly a step. But what I found is that I wanted to know exactly how this would enact. And through my university, we were able to ask students that I had been working with if they would create something in their schools that was for activism. And so while we did this, we interviewed them as they were going along. And the students chose to build a life-size teepee inside a room that the schools had given them. The school had given them one room, and they built using the science and the technology and the math and the art. They created a legitimate teepee inside an old classroom, which was then created to be a peaceful place that the student at any time would be able to leave and go into this room and gather themselves together. They added to that, the school said that they would hire 5 elders from the First Nations community to be there to facilitate students. There would be 2 people there at all times. What an elder is usually someone over 65, 70 who is a wise one. They're the keeper of the knowledge. And what we observed was that these 15 and 16-year-old kids would come in and not abuse, but go in to get their thoughts and think and be peaceful, and would always have the voice of an elder to speak with. These are 2 of the examples of what we've been doing. There was also another intergenerational project we did with LGBTQ people in Vancouver. So kids of 15 to 19 and older people from 70 to 90. And we found that the dialogue that would happen between generations that had missed some generations became very rich and quite miraculous. The idea of dialogue and democracy is certainly many thousands of years old, and I am not married to the notion of verbatim dialogue. And it was certainly in conversation with the people who we work with. We ask, could it be said? Is it okay if we write this down? Is it easier to read it this way? But certainly the verbatim mentality is there, is that what the people say is what we are talking about. Hearing the words from the true people who are involved, in my opinion, becomes very, very important. I think it sticks very much to the notion of evolution, and as was mentioned before, the notion of evolving dialogues. And it's kind of a reminder to me as a human being, not as an academic, but as a human being, as a parent, as a friend, as a partner, to keep the notion of dialogue, because when we have dialogue, then the notion of interruption, maybe disagreement will happen, but the notion of the ability to humanize one is what is happening in dialogue. And certainly with both the Americans and the British governments in the turmoil they're in at this point, what we do not see is dialogue. And so I do believe that the notion of dialogue and using dialogue as a primary source of research is a way that has helped what I'm doing in the notion of interculturality and humanity.